Thank you, and know that our committee has your back. Madam Secretary, this is your first appearance before the committee, and I look forward to continuing to work closely with you and your team as we strive to undo the damage and the chaos created by your predecessor. When you took office, you inherited an unprecedented crisis at our southern border, at all our borders, created by President Biden, Vice President and Border Czar Kamala Harris, and Secretary Mayorkas. For 4 years, the administration and unaccountable bureaucrats helped craft their extreme agenda, dismantled our secure border, gutted interior immigration enforcement, and implemented a policy of mass catch and release that flooded our communities with millions of illegal immigrants. Under the Biden-Harris administration, Customs and Border Protection recorded more than 11 million encounters of inadmissible aliens at our border. On top of that astronomical number, CBP has recorded roughly 2 million known gotaways, a number that exceeded the previous 10 fiscal years combined. That's more than 13 million inadmissible aliens who violated our sovereign border in just 4 years, around quadruple the number from the first Trump administration, and all because the administration's policies and rhetoric encouraged them to do so. The first few months of the second Trump administration provided a remarkable contrast. Under your and President Trump's leadership, the Border Patrol has apprehended just around 25,000 illegal crossers at the southwest border. By comparison, in December of 2024, more than 47,000 illegal crossers were apprehended. We went from a record 301,000 illegal crossings at the southwest border in December of 23 to just over 7,000 in March, an astonishing 97% decrease. It turns out we didn't need comprehensive immigration reform or woefully misguided Senate border bill that was pushed by the former secretary. We just needed a president willing to enforce the laws Congress had already passed. Because illegal aliens now know that President Trump will have them removed from the country, they've stopped coming. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle understand this. They do not want to talk about these victories because they know that for 4 years they stood on the wrong side of this issue, defending open borders and the abolition of ICE. They also understand the American people do not trust them on the issue of border security and immigration enforcement, in large part because of their radical stances. I expect they'll spend a lot of time today twisting the truth to mislead the American people. I look forward to hearing you set the record straight. And while we're talking about Democrats' anti-enforcement extremism, I'd like to briefly extend my regrets to you, Madam Secretary, and to the entire DHS workforce for the antics we saw on display outside the Delaney Hall detention facility last week. Right now, attacks on law enforcement across this country are up 400%. Public officials should be sending a clear signal that these brave public servants are to be respected and not assaulted. However, on Friday, current and former Democrat members of this committee stormed their way into an ICE facility in Newark, causing mass chaos, and verbally and physically accosting members of federal law enforcement in the process. I'd like to share a video.
The Department of Homeland Security is warning there could be more arrests following the incident that you see here.
I'm embarrassed by what I saw, and everyone should be. This behavior is utterly unbecoming of a citizen, let alone a member of Congress. Democrats may talk a big game about law and order, but these actions are a violation of the sacred principle. Not only have Democrats excused these actions, but they've actually tried to blame ICE for what happened. When you punch a law enforcement officer, that's not the law enforcement officer's fault. This behavior demands a swift and firm response, and I assure you action will be taken. Despite Democrats' best efforts to prevent it, The Trump administration has ended the immediate crisis at our borders. However, more work remains, particularly in removing the millions of individuals who have no lawful basis to be in the United States. It is essential that we swiftly fund enforcement efforts through the reconciliation process. Congress must also codify President Trump's successful policies to ensure they can withstand the schemes of open border radicals. Meanwhile, the open border is not the only threat our nation faces. While the Biden-Harris administration had its back turned, the Chinese Communist Party executed brazen operations on U.S. soil, including running secret police stations in our cities and conducting surveillance operations. On top of that, Chinese-affiliated firms are buying up U.S. farmland and commercial properties, including in areas near sensitive government and military sites. More than 60,000 Chinese nationals illegally crossed our southwest border between fiscal year 21 and 24. Most of them were released by the Biden administration into the interior, despite us not having their true intentions or backgrounds. The CCP is pushing the envelope harder than ever. Consequently, we need a robust, innovative, and consistent effort to push right back. Our cyber borders also remain under assault. Most notably, malicious cyber actors associated with the Chinese government have targeted us with some of the most sophisticated and sustained hacking operations we have ever seen. The Salt and Volt Typhoon intrusions revealed significant gaps in our cyber posture, compromising Americans' private data and key sectors of our critical infrastructure. We have not forgotten devastating attacks like the Colonial Pipeline in the spring of 21, which led to oil and gas shortages across our country and lines at almost every gas station. We cannot stay ahead of these evolving cyber threats if we do not have the right people with the right skills to defend our nation. Today, more than 500,000 cyber positions across this country in both public and private sectors are currently unfilled. That's 500,000 cyber professionals not on the front lines to defend us from the malicious activity jeopardizing our national security. That's why I introduced the Cyber Pivot Act, which would create an ROTC-like scholarship program enabling men and women across this country to gain hands-on experience in cybersecurity or related fields in exchange for a period of required government service across any level of government. Earlier this year, the committee favorably reported the act to the House. Democrat Senator Gary Peters, ranking member of the Homeland Security Governmental Affairs Committee, and Senator Mike Rounds, chairman of the Senate Armed Services Subcommittee on Cybersecurity, introduced a companion legislation to this in the Senate. It's time to bring this bill to the floor for a vote. Madam Secretary, I look forward to working with you on finding creative solutions to our cyber workforce shortage, as well as ensuring that the agencies under DHS tasked with defending our cyber borders, primarily CISA, remain focused on their task. As your budget rightly indicates, the agency's censorship of millions of Americans will come to an end. Instead, CISA's engagement with the private sector must focus on protecting critical infrastructure and our federal civilian networks. This must include streamlining burdensome regulatory requirements and ensuring CISA remains a trusted and reliable partner to the public and private sectors. I trust that over the next 4 years, you'll devote maximum effort to dismantling the censorship industrial complex while ensuring that CISA is positioned to succeed at its core mission. These are some of the most substantial challenges, but many more await. Madam Secretary, I expect continued progress on all of these issues, but I'm equally confident in your leadership and resolve to get this job done. Together, let's resecure our homeland. I now recognize the ranking member for an opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Madam Secretary, to the hearing. Mr. Chairman, before we begin, I want to recognize National Police Week and thank the officers who protect our communities, this capital, and our country honorably and ably. We appreciate their service. As we observe National Police Week, I again call on the Speaker to follow the law and finally hang the plaque honoring those brave officers who defended the United States Capitol from a violent mob on January 6th. Over 140 law enforcement officers were assaulted that day, and honoring their bravery and sacrifice as promised is the least Congress can do. Turning to today's hearing, I'm glad Secretary Noem is finally testifying before the committee. After all, it's been 3 months since I sent you a letter asking for her to testify on the Trump administration's dismantling of the Department of Homeland Security and its harmful effects on communities across the country. Secretary Noem, I guess the chairman didn't think systematically dismantling the Department of Homeland Security, firing the federal workers who keep us safe, and violating the Constitution of the United States justified your timely appearance before this committee. But when Donald Trump demanded that Congress hand him money to do more damage to our Homeland Security, Republicans bent over backwards to help him and his billionaire friends at the expense of the American people. Whatever got you here, Secretary Noem, I'm glad you found time among your many photo ops and costume changes to testify about why President Trump is seeking more taxpayer dollars and what you plan to do with that money if you get it. And it is a lot of money. We're talking about $176 billion. That's how much President Trump has demanded that Congress give you to spend next year. Never mind the fact that your department is spending taxpayers' money so fast this year, you're about to be broke. Now you're saying you need $44 billion more, but all you've done is slash, burn, cut, dismantle, and tear apart DHS since you got here. You cut programs at the Federal Emergency Management Agency that help Americans prepare for and recover from disasters. You are unlawfully withholding grant money meant to prevent terrorism and respond to emergencies from local communities across the country. You cut programs at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Agency, which prevents attacks on power lines, water treatment plants, schools, hospitals, and other critical infrastructure. You security officers who protect our airports and our airplanes. You cut the Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, which keeps DHS from digging into Americans' private lives and violating people's constitutional rights. You are making Americans less safe. If you're cutting the things that help keep America safe, why should we give you an extra $44 billion? Is it to deport American citizen children with cancer? Is it to deport more veterans of the United States military? Is it to ignore the Supreme Court's order to facilitate the release of a lawful permanent resident you mistakenly shipped off to a foreign prison? Is it to punish people for exercising their First Amendment right? Is it to disappear more people off our streets with no due process and ship them to a foreign dictator's prison? Is it to fire more military veterans who continue to serve their country by working for DHS? Is it to slash efforts to fight persistent threats from foreign terrorist organizations and domestic terrorists? Is it to dismantle FEMA as hurricane season is about to get underway? Is it to decimate CISA and invite China, Russia, Iran, and other adversaries into our cyber networks? Is it just to be mean, threaten, and deny due process to vulnerable people? These are not hypotheticals. These are things that DHS has already done under your leadership or is trying to do, Secretary Noem. Your policies and actions are so bad that Republican members have been running and hiding from their own constituents, refusing to hold town halls because they know they cannot defend this administration. Republicans are unwilling to defend the Trump administration with the folks back home. So I guess it's down to you to try to do that here today. But you can't defend the indefensible, Secretary Noem. Your department is out of control. On your watch, the department is breaking the law, it's hurting people, and it's making America less safe. The Trump administration is outright lying to the courts and the American people. Just last week, 3 members from New Jersey, all current members or former members of this committee, tried to visit an ICE detention center, which they are permitted to do, as you know, by law, without notice, to conduct oversight after reports of issues at the facility. Instead of following the law, masked
All right, there's
Mr. Higgins, I'm just asking
hold
to
on.
see the document.
I have the floor. All right, so we have a motion to vote on the submission of this for the record. That's all that has been stated. And
have a parliamentary inquiry, sir.
Do not interrupt me again. We are on the vote on whether or not this can be entered into the record. A motion has been made, and we will vote on that motion. All of those in
I
favor.
have a parliamentary inquiry before we vote, sir.
Mr. Ranking Member.
It's our request that we object. And in the middle of the objection, you consider a motion, which...
He was done talking about Ms.
No, he wasn't. No, he wasn't. You stopped him from talking.
I just have a parliamentary inquiry.
A parliamentary inquiry. Okay, go ahead. You have the floor.
Is it the procedure of this committee that someone who is making an objection to the admission of evidence cannot review that evidence before we vote on it?
Yeah, the content is irrelevant to the motion, and the motion has been made to vote on the submission for the record.
The content is irrelevant? I mean, that's what I'm objecting to. If she is accurate in what her representation is, I will withdraw my objection. I just need to see the document.
Somebody walk the thing over there and let him read it. I mean, get to the bottom of this quickly. We'll hold on your vote, Mr. Ogles.
Mr. Chairman, given that this is a tweet from the Attorney General that is effectively, I believe, consistent with what Ms. Taylor Greene says, I withdraw my objection.
Gentleman withdraws his objection. I now recognize, who's up? Mr. Jimenez for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Madam Secretary, for the fine work that you've done. I also want to thank you for approving the members on this side of the aisle, and myself included, in our assertion through the last 4 years that what happened at the southern border was done willfully and purposely by the Biden administration, because nobody could be that dumb. Do you share that opinion?
Sir, I believe it was a decision made by the previous president to not enforce our laws and to allow an invasion of our country.
So all the claims by the other side of the aisle that we needed more money for the Biden administration, we need more people, et cetera, do you believe that was accurate, or do you believe that was inaccurate?
No, sir, that was not true.
That's absolutely, because the numbers speak for themselves.
That's true.
And simply by enforcing our laws and having the will to enforce our laws, we've seen a dramatic fall in the number of crossings. And so I want to thank you for that. Now I want to switch over to FEMA. I used to be the mayor of Miami-Dade County. I used to represent, and really it was my job to protect 2.8 million people in one of the most hurricane-prone areas of the United States. I was also a city manager of the city, and I was a fire chief for the city of Miami, and at the time I was also on a FEMA advisory panel. And I can tell you that FEMA needs many, many reforms. I remember as mayor of Miami-Dade County in 2015, we were still processing claims through FEMA for Hurricane Katrina, which happened 10 years earlier. And so while I do support the efforts to reform FEMA, there are certain states and cities and counties that actually can respond a heck of a lot better than others. And we can't leave those that can't fend for themselves, to fend for themselves. And so I would hope that that's part of your review and the reform of FEMA. Is that what you plan to do?
Yes, sir. We know that every single state is not prepared today to take over their emergency operations. That's why the president has been clear that he wants to empower states, give them the opportunity to build out their response, to also sign MOUs with surrounding states and other resources they can use to best serve their people. He just doesn't believe that FEMA has been successful in being there in a time of crisis for people.
And I can tell you, ma'am, as mayor of Miami-Dade County, that they haven't. Yeah. Okay, and that I never ever, when I talk to my people, I said, hey, we're going to have to do this ourselves.
Right.
There is no cavalry coming from the federal government. We have to take care of ourselves. All we need from the federal government really is the money to reimburse us. And you're not even good at doing that, okay? And so hopefully you can speed that process up. There are some people in my community that are a little bit concerned about the TPS rules and the suspension of TPS. I would request that you can meet with myself, Representative Mario Diaz-Balart, and Maria Salazar, so maybe we can do a little nuance to this so that we can put those concerns at rest. I also sent a letter to you concerning 100 Cuban oppressors. They're actually living in the United States that were granted either asylum or entry into the United States that should have never been here, and we need to deport those. Have you received that letter, or what's your department doing about looking into and vetting those 100 names that I gave you?
Yes, sir. I received your letter and read it this week, and will be responding to you. And that is something that President Trump is focused on, is adding integrity back to the programs that we have. Our immigration programs, our services like TPS, like the visa waiver program, our parole, our asylum programs, a lot of those got perverted and changed and misused and abused during the last administration. And adding integrity back to them is incredibly important for this administration. TPS was always meant to be a temporary program.
I agree.
Built on giving people an opportunity to be safe from violence or environmental crisis that may be happening in their home country. Those individuals, we're working with them, and we'll have a chance to meet with you and the other congressmen to address their needs and see what their options are. They do have 60 days from the time it is published. Those individuals that you spoke to me about, that still has not been published in the Federal Register, so they have several months here that we can work on the solutions to make sure that they're in a program that's appropriate for their situation.
Fair enough, ma'am. I appreciate that, and I hope we can have that meeting soon. Finally, I'm going to give you another example. When I was mayor of Miami-Dade County, there was then Senator Kamala Harris and a lot of other Democrats were demonstrating outside a homestead facility that was meant for children, saying how bad the conditions were, et cetera, et cetera. Well, as mayor of Miami-Dade County, I asked to actually go in there. I viewed it. I went in there. Since I speak Spanish, I actually spoke to the children. They're all being treated great. There was nothing happening there that would make me ashamed to be an American. And so what was great about that, it was that we were actually taking care of those children, unlike what happened under the Biden administration when we lost about 300,000 of them. With that, I yield back. Thank you.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Goldman for 5 minutes questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to go back to Mr. Kilmar Abrego Garcia's case, Madam Secretary. But my first question for you is a pretty simple one. It's basic civics. Which branch of government does the Constitution give the authority to interpret what the law is, the judiciary or the executive branch?
Sir, going forward, the interpretation of the law, you make the laws in this body. The judicial branch makes sure that they have integrity and they're applied properly to individuals.
So so I'm just going to take that as the judiciary branch. Now, let's focus for a second on what the judiciary branch has said about this case. We know the Supreme Court has said 9-0 that notwithstanding your statements under oath here today, that Mr. Kilmar Abrego Garcia was afforded due process, he was in fact not afforded due process, because then if he were, you would have seen the withholding order that did not permit him to be deported to El Salvador. Now you allege, and I guess the Attorney General alleges, that he's a member of MS-13. That may very well be the case. And if he is, now that that is a foreign terrorist organization, certainly the immigration laws would allow him, and in fact require him, to be deported. I certainly would support that. But the problem that we have here is what you allege, what Ms. Green alleges, what the Attorney General alleges, is not the judiciary. You don't get to decide whether or not he is an MS-13 member. And you don't have to take my word for it, because Judge Wilkinson, a Fourth Circuit judge, very conservative, addressed this argument. He said, the government asserts that Abrego Garcia is a terrorist and a member of MS-13. Perhaps, but perhaps not. Regardless, he is still entitled to due process. If the government is confident in its position, it should be assured that position will prevail in proceedings to terminate the withholding of removal order. Will you commit right now to give Mr. Abrego Garcia that process where you can prove your allegation that he is a member of MS-13?
Congressman, that judge that you just quoted did not say he was not a member of MS-13. Who did say that he was a member of MS-13 was law enforcement officers that encountered this individual.
Yeah, he knows that. This is a Fourth Circuit judge. He knows all of what the evidence is, and he's saying if that evidence. So you're not going to commit to follow this order. You won't commit to follow this court order.
By the way, he identified
Madam Secretary,
himself.
I reclaim my time. Stop filibustering. Stop filibustering.
Surrounded by gang members of MS-13.
Will you give Mr. Abrego Garcia the due process that the Supreme Court and Judge Wilkinson has required you to give him?
Abrego Garcia is an El Salvador resident who is in his home country. If he were to come back to this country, he would be immediately removed again.
How do you know?
He has received and been treated appropriately,
So
sir, and he is not.
How can you say he's been treated appropriately if the Supreme Court has ruled 9-0? 9-0 that he hasn't been treated appropriately. Why is your opinion better and have more authority than the Supreme Court?
Investigators, 2 judges, an immigration court that all said he was MS-13 and was removed from this country.
But you understand, that is you saying that. That is you saying that.
That is them saying that. This
No.
is investigators and law
That is
enforcement
you
officers
making that
in the case they
determination.
built against him. If you don't
The
trust our law
court
enforcement
has
officers
considered all that.
and
The judge has
investigators,
considered all that,
then
Madam
who do you
Secretary.
trust if you
And
don't
if you would be
trust judges?
quiet, because I'm reclaiming my time, you are not following this court order. But let's focus on the court order, because this opinion also says that to facilitate, which the Supreme Court is requiring, is an active verb. It requires that steps be taken. What steps have you taken to return Mr. Abrego Garcia to allow him to get due process?
Abrego Garcia is in his home country.
What
If he were to come
steps
back,
have
your
you
advocacy-
taken?
If your continued advocacy for him were to...
I'm not advocating for him.
Yes, you
I'm
are.
advocating for a
Absolutely.
court order, Madam
Gone to the
Secretary.
mat for this
The
man
court
who
order
has terrorized
says
people
that
in
you
traffic
must take
and human
steps
beings.
to follow the court order. You are here under oath. What steps have you taken to return Mr. Abrego Garcia pursuant to this court order?
It's got to be extremely discouraging to be one of your constituents. To see you fight for a terrorist like this and not fight for them is extremely alarming to me.
I'm fighting for due process, and that's under the Constitution.
The gentleman's
and you
time
should
has
fight too for
expired.
due process.
The gentleman's time has expired. I now recognize Ms. Green for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Democrats have spent the last 4 years terrorizing Americans with their open border policies. They flooded our communities with over 13 million illegals from over 170 countries and territories who invaded our borders, raped our women and children, and murdered our own people. It's shocking to hear them to continue to defend cartels, MS-13, and terrorists today. Democrats claimed over and over again that legislation was needed to fix the problems that they created, yet to this day, no new border legislation has been enacted, and border crossings are down 93%. It was just reported that according to CBP, only 5 aliens were temporarily released into the United States in all of April. Only 5. This is compared to the 68,000 released in April of 2024 under the Biden administration. Thank you, Secretary Noem, for your great work and your leadership. This is truly saving America. There's nothing Democrats love more than defending the cartels, the criminals, and the rapists, and now we finally have a president in the White House and an administration that defends the American people. As you're aware, Secretary Noem, CISA previously developed a censorship laundering scheme through its counter mis, dis, and malinformation, MDM, efforts that suppressed conservative opinions and went after President Trump's supporters. Members of Congress, senators, including myself, were permanently banned. I was permanently banned on Twitter under this. What started as an election interference campaign eventually developed into censoring issues well beyond the election and COVID and climate change. Through their NGO partnerships, tickets were created on posts they thought were misinformation and subsequently sent to social media platforms with recommendations for them to be censored. Would you please provide an update on your efforts to investigate the severity of MDM efforts during the Biden regime, and what steps are you taking to ensure CISA will never again serve as the United States government's Ministry of Truth?
Yeah, no, thank you, Congressman. The CISA definitely was so far off mission, they forgot what their purpose clearly was. The CISA was created to hunt down bad actors and to harden our systems, to support local infrastructure, critical infrastructure that makes this country run, and those small and medium-sized businesses that don't have the resources to make sure that their software programs, their technology was secure from hackers and from bad actors around the world. Instead, what they were doing by out there deciding what was truth, what wasn't truth, censoring what people could say, was not their mission whatsoever. And so we have stopped those activities. We have refocused our resources back onto the cybersecurity mission and ensured that CISA is cooperating with our local and state individuals and businesses to make sure that we're truly being proactive at not just hardening our systems, but stopping the attacks that we have from countries that hate us. So the Ministry of Truth, as what CISA was operating before, was wrongful actions that were taken by employees of this administration, the last administration, to go after political targets, to manipulate the information that Americans were receiving, and that has stopped. We have fallen far behind in what we've been able to do as far as cooperating with other intelligence agencies and with those at the state level to make sure that we're being proactive. And that's one thing that we have focused extremely hard on in the last several months, is ensuring that those relationships are built back up, that we're partnering with private businesses to get the support that we need to make sure that we are hardening America's systems, because we're vulnerable to our weakest link. And oftentimes our weakest link is that small business or individual that ties into our largest systems.
Yes, thank you. No American should be censored by their government for their political beliefs and their statements. Thank you for that. Also, the Trump administration has committed to reuniting unaccompanied alien children lost or trafficked under the Biden-Harris administration back to their families and guardians. What efforts is DHS taking to ensure that these vulnerable children are safely reunited with their loved ones? Because the Biden administration lost hundreds of thousands of children.
Yes, absolutely. We know that there was upwards to over 300,000 children that were lost during the last administration. So President Trump has made it a priority of every cabinet secretary and agency to make sure those children are located, that they are returned to safety. As you know, the refugee program and sponsors were greatly abused under the previous administration, and the Department of HHS is bringing some integrity back to that program and making sure that these children are cared for appropriately, and that someone is watching over them that truly has their best interests at heart, that really truly cares for them as a family member. I would say over 5,000 have been found, and our HSI individuals and law enforcement officers are continuing to identify them.
Gentlelady's time has expired. I now recognize Ms. Ramirez for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Chairman. Secretary, it's good to see you. I'm going to go straight to the questions because I have a lot of them. Let me start just following up with Congressman Goldman about judiciary. Do you agree that the judiciary is a co-equal branch of government, and it is your obligation as a member of the executive branch to honor decisions made by the highest court of the land? Yes or no, Secretary?
We are abiding by all federal judges' orders, absolutely.
So yes, it's a co-equal branch of government. Okay, well, let me ask you a follow-up question to that. Do you agree that Congress is a co-equal branch of government, and it is your obligation as a member of the executive branch to honor legislation and appropriations duly authorized by Congress? Yes or no?
Yes, that's why I'm thrilled to work.
Well, let me ask you the follow-up question here, because I have a lot of them. Do you agree that Article 1 of the Constitution gives Congress the power of the purse? Yes or no?
Yes, that is a duty.
Do you
of
believe
Congress
that,
to be
let me
able
ask
to
you another
appropriate
follow-up, it's
funds.
just yes or no. Do you believe you have the power to disregard congressional appropriations and unilaterally repurpose funds that have been duly appropriated by Congress? Yes or no?
Ma'am, we are not doing that.
So the
We are
answer to
using
you is
dollars
no.
as to
All
how
right,
they
well,
were
it was a yes or
appropriated.
no,
We're ensuring that the
Secretary. Let me
programs have
continue. Interestingly, you said no. But since you've been Secretary, You have repeatedly disregarded the law. You have illegally impounded funds that Congress appropriated and that your branch of government must implement pursuant to the law. Yet you've closed offices established in law, including the Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, the Office of the Immigration Detention Ombudsman, the Office of the Citizenship and Immigration Services, and you've canceled contracts for programs authorized in law, including shelter and service programs and citizenship and integration grants. You've obstructed and roughed up members of this committee as they attempted to conduct congressional oversight, and then you vilified them. But my question is, if they were so bad, why were they allowed to go in after to conduct oversight? Let me just continue. You redirected funds to terrorize our communities. You created taxpayer-funded political propaganda campaigns to terrorize families and children who don't sleep at night because of the terror of those commercials that you are putting out there. You hold sick, disrespectful press conferences in my state where, let me be clear, you are not welcome. You corruptly used emergency authority to avoid procurement to make Trump's private prison donors richer by directing $45 billion for them to expand ICE detention centers. You defunded work to address real threats to the homeland, all while you pursued college newspaper editors, labor leaders, and even a Harvard scientist who failed to declare frog embryos at the airport. Clearly, we don't have time for all my questions, so I have 13 pages worth of questions that I will be submitting to the record that I expect you and the administration to answer. But here is my final question to you. When you took your oath, did you swear to support and defend the Constitution of the United States of America? Yes or no?
Yes, I did.
So I find it laughable. You don't behave like someone who takes that oath seriously. And let me tell you why. We don't live in a dictatorship or a monarchy. Trump's will is not the guiding doctrine of this nation, and our country is not a playground for his or your twisted authoritarian fantasies. We are a democracy. We defend the Constitution and we affirm the rule of law. We respect the co-equal branches of government and we uphold our rights, even when we disagree. The foundation of our nation is based on a core set of constitutional rights upon which our prosperity, our pluralism, and our peace depend on it. You, however, have been leading this work for 116 days, and in that time, you have profiled and dehumanized our neighbors. You've betrayed our constitutional commitment to due process. You've deported United States citizens. You've undermined the courts. You've broken the law. You've engaged in corruption, and you've weaponized the immigration system to violate civil rights. As Senator Murphy perfectly stated, your department is out of control, but you're responsible. You have betrayed the sacred fundamentals of your oath. And I believe to my core that you are not fit to hold the office. And I again, to your face, demand your immediate resignation. And I put it and place it on the record for all of us to see. With that, Chairman, I yield back.
Generally yields. Mr. Gabarino is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. Madam Secretary, thank you so much for being here today. I'm the chairman of the Subcommittee on Cybersecurity Infrastructure Protection, so I work with CISA a lot. I have a few quick questions for you. Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act of 2015 provides the modern basis for information sharing between the private sector and the federal government. My subcommittee tomorrow will be having a hearing on CISA, the renewal of CISA 2015, since it expires in September. I'm just wondering, do you support the reauthorization of CISA 2015 ahead of its expiration?
Yes, I do, sir. It's an incredibly important piece of legislation.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Another hearing that we had this year, we dealt with the proposed CERCIA rulemaking process, and it started under the Biden administration. We heard from industry; they were not happy the way it went. I'm not happy with the way. I'm sure a lot of people aren't happy the way it went, and I still remain concerned that the scope of the proposed rules have strayed from congressional's intent. One of the things that came up at our hearing was whether or not CISA would consider to provide an ex parte process so we could get more comments from industry and hopefully get this back on track instead of starting over from scratch because it has to be done. Is that something that the department would consider?
Yes, we would support that, sir. I think that more input from the private sector is important to make sure we're doing the appropriate actions.
I mean, information sharing and making sure that people are actually responding to incidents instead of talking to their attorneys, I think is very, very important. And we want to make sure that this is the response rule, not just one of many other rules that are out there. I sent a letter back on February 19th regarding workforce reductions. It was about CISA staff that was fired and their responsibilities and titles. I've not yet received a response. And given the growing cybersecurity threat landscape and the administration's stated interest, which they have in addressing these threats, I'm concerned that reducing CISA's staff will not help CISA accomplish the mission of protecting cybersecurity, providing cybersecurity to the people that need it, or helping. The letter asks for the number of staff, the responsibilities of those staff, and the impacts on CISA's ability to fulfill its mission. I know you can't provide that answer now, but can I get a commitment to get that response to that letter sometime soon?
Absolutely.
I appreciate that as well. And I know we're here about the budget, so I do want to ask some questions. In the administration's skinny budget request, it's seeking a $491 million reduction for CISA. I'm all on board with getting rid of disinformation and misinformation, and I was supportive of that cut, but that was in fiscal year 2023, that was only $20 million. Only $20 million of its budget went, so getting rid of that, that still leaves about $471 million of cuts. Which is about a 17% cut to its total budget. Why such a large cut? And in addition to that, there was also, I believe, a program request moving $130 million around. What programs are going to be affected with that request?
Well, Congressman, the focus within CISA needs to be on ensuring that it's fulfilling why it was created. It was created to support critical infrastructure and to make sure that we're out there addressing the cybersecurity concerns that we have. The reductions that you see are in the areas where it got off mission, where it was involved in mis, dis, and malinformation, and also the censorship activities. That's where the reflection is, but the cybersecurity side of CISA is strengthened and emboldened under President Trump's leadership and will be into the future, and making sure that we're giving them the tools that they need to create new partnerships. Those plans to partner with private industries will make us much more efficient and accountable to taxpayers, while making sure that we actually have answers to some of the threats that we have in front of us. That's the thing that has alarmed me the most about CISA is the lack of information that they have, the lack of solutions that they have, and how they protect our critical infrastructure. And when you look at Volt Typhoon, it wasn't just that we're vulnerable. It's that the Chinese have proven, PRC has proven with bad actors that they can shut down our water plants, our electrical grid, that they have the ability to do that. And if we think something in the past like a pandemic or a crisis like that was scary, wait until people's electricity is gone or their water system shuts down. And so that is one of the reasons why CISA needs to be laser focused on truly what its mission is.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I'm out of time, but I also just want to say I hope we can work together on this, and I'm very excited for Mr. Planke's nomination. I think he's going to do a great job, and hopefully they can confirm him sometime soon. But I'd like to talk to you more about the budget when we have a chance.
This time has expired. Chair recognizes.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to enter for the record an article from the Oversight Project that quotes the Supreme Court case Gojek versus the United States that talks about Congress's power of oversight, stating that no committee of either the House or Senate and no senator and no representative is free on its or his or her own to conduct investigations unless authorized. And that was a Supreme Court case. I'd also ask you...
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. I also ask unanimous consent to enter for the record that the ICE facility that Democrats and one of our own members here stormed, according to the Secretary, Assistant Secretary, of Homeland categorize these detainees in ICE as murderers, terrorists, child rapists, and MS-13 gang members.
Without objection, so
Mr.
ordered.
Chairman,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I have unanimous consent.
Mr.
request as
Goldman is
well.
recognized.
I would like to introduce an article just published by Bloomberg Government in which the acting director of Immigrations and Customs Enforcement acknowledges that any member of Congress has the right to show up at any detention facility with or without appointments, and that he will follow that law.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Chairman, I have unanimous consent also.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you. I just want to also enter for the record Section 527A of the Department of Homeland Security Appropriations Act of 2024, that it says explicitly that members of Congress have the right to access ICE detention facilities with no prior notice at any time. If I can-
Without objection.
Thank you.
So ordered. Ms. McIver is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member. A lot has been said, and I expect a lot more will be said about the department's interaction with members of this body when it comes to oversight. But this is not about me. Madam Secretary, it's not every day we have a cabinet member before this committee. As you know, the members of this committee have constitutional oversight responsibility for your department, and there are many things regarding this administration's Homeland Security policies that require our immediate attention. That is the work I am here to do today and every day. Secretary, this committee and the American people deserve answers for the actions of the Department of Homeland Security under this administration and the policies that have been put into place. The department has overseen a regime of cruelty, chaos, and deep disregard for human dignity, all under the pretense of security. The department is being mismanaged, and its policies undermine our nation's values. This does not make us safer. The exact opposite, exactly. Secretary, we need answers about your department's union busting at TSA, deporting U.S. citizens, terminating the legal status of international students for no apparent reason, and disregarding the rule of law. None of these issues at your department exist in a vacuum. In fact, they are all fundamentally connected to the administration's overarching cruelty. We want to hear from you because we are hoping you can make it make sense for us. Because with all due respect, we are all trying to understand why in the world this is taking place. In my district and around this nation, countless international students had their visas revoked without due process, without warning, and without any regard for how this would devastate their lives. These are students who came here to learn, to build their futures, and join our workforce, only to have the rug pulled out from under them by this department's actions. How can we expect international students to trust our institutions and contribute to our economy when we treat them like they've done something wrong just because they are here? Are we no longer the home of the American dream? I also want you to understand DHS's impact on our entire workforce. I proudly represent over 1,000 dedicated TSA workers who had the right to unionize. But that right has been stripped away by your department. This is an attack on the people who safeguard our skies and whose dedication we rely on now more than ever. And the destruction doesn't stop there. I represent communities that live in constant fear each and every day. Families too terrified to step outside and send their kids to school, go grocery shopping, or take a trip to the doctor because of the harassment of ICE and Homeland Security. This isn't public safety, it's state-sponsored fear. I understand that this administration believes that it is its business to scare people into submission and act alone with no regard for the law to decide who is worthy to live in this country or not. However, it is this committee's business to make sure your department is held accountable and to get the American people the answers they've been looking for. So, with that, Madam Secretary, I have a few yes or no questions. Do you agree that revoking student visas without notice can cause fear and confusion among international students? Yes or no?
Congressman, I do not,
Congresswoman, but yes or no?
Congresswoman, I do not decide legal status or visa programs for
I will
students.
take
The
that
Department of
as,
State
I'll take that
does.
as a yes. Do you support restoring full collective bargaining rights for TSA employees? Yes or no?
Ma'am, currently today, TSA does not have the
Yes or
ability
no?
to unionize.
Okay, take that as a no. Do you believe that TSA workers should make a livable wage? Yes or no?
Yes, TSA workers are critically important to
Thank
our
you for
security
that. Are
systems
you
for our
aware, are you
airlines.
aware that recent student visa revocations occur without due process or proper notification?
Ma'am, I don't make a determination of status.
Yes or
The
no?
Department of State does
I'm guessing
that.
you don't know? Okay. Do you believe that TSA workers have the right to better workplace conditions?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay,
TSA
great, thank you for
workers are
that.
incredibly
Do you
important
believe
to
that
our-
students should have an opportunity to appeal before their visas are revoked? Yes or no?
All processes are followed and that are set out as tools.
I'm guessing
and
it's a no. Okay,
processes
one
in
more
this
last question in
Congress.
9 seconds. Do you believe that that revoking collective bargaining rights for TSA workers affects their morale and job performance? Yes or no?
I believe TSA is critically important.
Okay,
in
I'll
the
take
future
that
and
as,
they have
maybe
been-
you don't know, maybe it's yes or no.
Gentlelady's time has
With that,
expired. I now
with that,
recognize
yield.
Mr. Gonzalez for 5 minutes of his questioning.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Madam Secretary, for doing a wonderful job. And it's been a breath of fresh air. A lot of people like to talk about the border. I represent a large part of the border. The places that are on TV are the places that you have visited, the places that I represent, like Del Rio, like Eagle Pass, like El Paso, other places, and y'all have done a fantastic job. I want to start with BORTAC. BORTAC has been, when we talk about how do we go out and apprehend these hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of convicted criminal illegal aliens that are a threat to all our communities, BORTAC is always the answer. I recently met with them. They're based out of Fort Bliss. They're in El Paso. They're always the ones that go out and are doing the heavy lifting. If I'd love to put this on your radar. I know you're making a lot of budgetary decisions, and the administration is. That facility is way, way outdated. For the work that they do, they need a new facility. And I know it's on Fort Bliss. If there's a way that we can work either through this committee or through the Appropriations Committee to find a way to give them the proper housing, just the proper headquarters that they need, I think this would be very critical in going out there. I'd love to hear your thoughts on BORTAC.
Yeah, I spent some time with them as well down at Fort Bliss, and they do incredible work, and they don't just operate within their own agency, but also partner with other law enforcement agencies and meet needs around the country at a moment's notice. So their skill set is unique. Their specialty training is needed, and in fact, it needs to be expanded. We could use more teams like they have and give them more opportunities to continue to serve, because the skill set they bring to the table keeps people safer and helps us meet the challenges with what we need to protect our officers out in the field and to make sure citizens are protected as well. So we'll certainly look at their facilities and see what we can do to strengthen the resources that they have.
Thank you for that. They're just doing incredible work. Once again, every time there's a problem solved, BORTAC has a role to play, whether it's, on the back, the intelligence piece to it, helping with some of these task forces, or actually going out and apprehending folks. On that note, Uvalde is in my district. We had, a couple of years ago, we had one of the worst school shootings in history, certainly in Texas's history. And, it was BORTAC that neutralized that shooter. And so I want to talk about school safety a little bit. You've got children, you've got grandchildren, I've got children. That's one thing that I think can bring us all together, is just the safety of our children. And one area that I think goes unlooked is the Secret Service's role. As I've dived into school safety, Secret Service is at the heart of a lot of these solutions. And nobody thinks it in that manner. I'd love to get your thoughts. When it comes to school safety, what role do you think the Secret Service is currently playing, or can it play in helping solve some of these problems?
Well, right now, Secret Service is underutilized, and they also are under-resourced. If you look through our reconciliation request and also fiscal year 26 budget request, there's additional dollars that are needed to really give Secret Service the tools, the training, and the resources that they need to meet every single situation that they're involved in right now. Obviously, they have the protectee units and agents that are out there on the ground protecting individuals and the most powerful in the world, but also they have an investigative side that is a skill set that many other agencies like to tap into and ask them for insight into. So working to protect our kids are our future. They really are what America is going to be and is today for many, many years. So it's incredibly important that we use that skill set to give advice, wisdom, but also training to those individuals that secure our schools. You know, the Department of Education has a partnership with us in how we train school security officers, but also how we go out and support local law enforcement to respond to situations like you experienced in your home district. It's a tragedy that we can be better equipped for and prepared for in the future, and making sure that we're taking care of people ahead of time.
That's it.
And addressing the concerns and the flags that happen before we end up in a situation like you experienced.
Yeah, I appreciate that response, and I'm really trying to get ahead of a problem, not wait for the problem to occur and then blame somebody else for why the problem was there. Like, let's just make sure our kids are safe as we harden schools, as we look for ideas to strengthen family units and do those different things. Once again, the Secret Service constantly continues to come up, so I look forward to working with you on that and other.
One thing I would say is in the last several months, Secret Service recruitment has been up over 200%.
Amazing.
And under President Trump and the recruitment efforts that we've had for that agency, overwhelmingly people want to be a part of their mission in the future.
You know, part of my schools, and I know I have just a little time, so part of my district, you know, the Guardian program where teachers are armed is what works for that community. Other communities, they don't want to have their teachers armed. That, in my eyes, that's for something for them to decide. But as far as a federal government response, I think the Secret Service can add to whatever local ideas they have. So I look forward to working with you on strengthening that and others. Thank you again, and I yield back, Chairman.
Gentleman's time has expired. I now recognize Ms. Johnson for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you so much, Mr.
Texas
Chairman.
to Texas.
And thank you, Madam Secretary, for appearing before committee today. I want to address several issues. I'm going to try not to repeat a lot of issues that have been addressed, but I do have some substantial concerns over how ICE agents present themselves to the public. Oftentimes, we've seen many videos out there where they're masked and not properly identified. I have a lot of real personal concern about that. I just put myself in the situation of that woman from Tufts, for example. You're just walking down the street, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, 3 masked men, not properly identified, attack you and try to take you away. I find that to be reprehensible and not the values of this country. What steps are you taking to make sure that your ICE agents are not masked and properly identified when they approach someone?
Well, ICE agents always identify themselves to individuals that they're encountering or that they're working with. What I would say as far as if they are wearing something over their faces, it's oftentimes because that agent has been involved in undercover operations or needs to be able to continue the investigative work that they do on a day-to-day basis.
But don't you think, Madam Secretary, that people have a right to see whoever's trying to apprehend them? I think it's creating this unrealistic vigilante system. And are you aware that your materials, ICE agents, jackets and the sorts, are available on Etsy for $20? Anybody can do that, throw a mask on, and run around and terrorizing people of color without any regard for the law, without any regard, because your agency does not have proper protocols to make sure their agents are clearly identified and marked when they're executing their jobs.
Our agents do identify themselves. They verbally do that, and then also by the clothing that they're wearing. And if they do have something that is covering some of their facial features, it's for their investigative work or their undercover work that they do as a part of their job duties as well. What I would say is that it is important that we follow the procedures and protocols for every encounter that we have, and they have done that in every situation to the best of my knowledge.
Well, I would suggest that your protocols need to be revised, because I don't think it's reasonable for masked men to be apprehending people on the streets. I think that instills a lot of fear. It doesn't instill security in the process. And in states like Texas, that is open carry, when any jackadoo can be walking around with a gun, I think some tragic circumstances are at bay. I'd like to switch gears to due process. I have a lot of concerns about the lack of due process that your agency has been affording people in this country. In Texas, for example, you had rounded up 171 individuals, were preparing to deport them, and it wasn't until the Supreme Court issued an opinion that that was unconstitutional and that their due process rights were being violated did your agency actually stop and adhere to the Supreme Court's opinion. My question to you is, Has those efforts ceased in your agency? Are you going to cease trying to deport people without access to due process in the courts of law in compliance with the United States Supreme Court?
Well, Congresswoman, we are following due process and using it as to how Congress has laid out to us in statute, and we are complying with all federal judges' orders as well.
Well, you weren't complying at that time. It took the United States Supreme Court to order you to comply, so you hadn't proactively complied on your own. You were intending to wrongfully deport people without access to a court hearing, without access to the rule of law, and that is why it was necessary for the United States Supreme Court,
Due process does not guarantee a hearing.
who issued an opinion ordering you and your agency to comply with the due process rights of the people in this country. That's what separates, that's what makes our country great, is we do have access to due process. And so my comment to you is I'm hoping as you move forward, because initially as you were proceeding through these deportation processes, you were not affording people due process, and the Supreme Court has now ordered you to do so. So I am assuming by your testimony that you do intend to comply with the Supreme Court's order moving forward, and we're not going to have any more instances of wrongful deportation without proper access to due process. Is that correct?
We are following federal judges' orders, and
Good.
we are complying with due process
Well, we look
procedures
forward to
as
that.
they are laid out, as Congress has given us those tools to do that.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. I have one other question about FEMA. I'm very concerned about the destruction of FEMA. You know, Texas is a state that has a lot of hurricanes, tornadoes, and natural disasters. We rely upon FEMA extensively, and I'm very worried about that. And when you are governor, though, you actually utilized FEMA for your own state. So you did recognize at the time when you were serving as a governor that FEMA played an important role in natural disasters within South Dakota. Is that correct?
Yes, we had 12 FEMA-related disasters during the 6 years I served as governor of the state of South Dakota.
But I just find it, I'm running out of time, but I just find it ironic.
I now recognize Mr. Pfluger, the gentleman from Texas, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary, thank you for being here. What a difference an election makes, what a difference a Congress makes, what a difference having you here instead of asking thousands of questions and getting no answers. And I'll start with the first question that I left off with and I know that may be funny to my colleagues, but it's not funny to me because of the known and suspected terrorists, the KSTs that came into this country. And I'll basically lead off with the last question that I asked your predecessor, which was the policy of the Department of Homeland Security and this administration when it comes to KSTs. And talk to us about the successes that we've had and kind of where we stand, because they left us with a real mess with 40 plus people that were in this country. And, you know, I'd like to hear what your department has done and tell us kind of the path forward.
Yeah, absolutely, Congressman. The previous administration let a lot of dangerous individuals into this country and get a foothold, and then not only just allowing them to perpetuate terrorist activities in our country, but also recruit new members and to build out their systems and to gain access to our infrastructure. So I'm very proud of the fact that President Trump has aggressively enforced the law. Let us use the tools that are afforded to us under the Department of Homeland Security to address these threats, bring them to justice and face consequences, and to get them out of our country. So he has removed over 250 known terrorists, suspected terrorists on the watch list, thousands and thousands of individuals that were affiliated with them, but also individuals that committed crimes that are members of MS-13, Tren de Aragua, but also cartels and their members and affiliates in this country. So overwhelmingly, the safety of our communities is in a much better spot than it was just 6 short months ago. And even the message that President Trump has been bold enough to send around the world. He specifically told me, Kristi, if you're given this job, I want you to tell the world that America has new leadership, that we are enforcing our laws now, and that Americans get to be prioritized and their safety comes first. And if you want to break our laws and come to this country, don't even try it. And that has sent an overwhelming message to the world that they're adhering to. That's one of the reasons you see less encounters at the border, is because people are staying home in their home countries because now they know we follow our laws. The Mexican president and her team told me that they believe they've stopped over 600,000 people in Mexico before they even reached our border because they got the message they could no longer cross into the United States. So we don't even know the hundreds of thousands of people that simply were in the process and turned around because President Trump has been very vocal at sending the message to the world, don't come here if you want to break our laws and victimize our people.
Well, the deterrent value of the policy, just enforcing the laws, has certainly been noticeable. I represent a district that includes part of your air and marine operations that flies drones out of San Angelo, Texas, and flies into the Gulf of Mexico, but also along the border. One of the issues that we faced in the previous administration was this huge number of known gotaways. Talk to us about the coordination with the state and local level. I also represent a piece of Fort Cavazos, and we have military personnel who have a designated area along the border. How is that process working for deterrence, but also to ensure there are no gotaways like we had?
Well, there are known gotaways, and then there's probably hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people that we don't necessarily know how many of them are in this country. That because we had Border Patrol and assets and Coast Guard and ICE agents diverted into processing paperwork and facilitating illegal entry into our country, they weren't doing their security operations. They weren't allowed to do their jobs. People have talked about me being out on the front lines with all of our components and agencies. I'll tell you why I'm there. The reason I'm walking alongside them is because I want to understand their jobs, where they don't have the equipment that they need, what authorizations and authorities they need to do their jobs. And overwhelmingly, they appreciate the fact that they finally have a secretary that shows up to walk alongside them, one that rides with them and doesn't ride over them and doesn't listen to them and has never been out in the field. They want me to be with them, and they're proud of the fact that I don't mind representing them and their agency to the rest of the world, saying I'm proud of the work that they do. We have a lot of gotaways. We also have some we don't even know that are in this country yet, and that's probably what keeps me up at night the most, is the fact that we don't really know the dangerous individuals that may be in this country that we have to get out before something happens that jeopardizes our national security.
Secretary, thank you for being here and for your service. Our country is safer having you at the helm. Mr. Chairman, yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. I now recognize Mr. Hernandez for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, hi. I represent Puerto Rico in Congress, and although we may disagree as to how, I do agree that disaster response in this country needs to be reimagined and made more effective. And I sincerely look forward to and hope to be a constructive partner in that respect. You know, nearly 8 years after Hurricane Maria struck the island, we have around $27 billion that have been obligated for Puerto Rico, yet only $4.4 billion have been dispersed. In the interest of time, I appreciate brief answers because there's a lot of anxiety in the island as to the future of these funds. Can you assure the people of Puerto Rico that these obligated funds are safe, regardless of any FEMA restructuring?
That is the biggest concern that we have within FEMA right now, is outstanding claims. And the worst thing the federal government can do is to say that there is a claim here, it's valid, that we are committed to fulfilling that responsibility.
I'm sorry, in the interest of time, could you say yes or no?
So those claims are something my team is going through right now and evaluating, and President Trump is committed
I will assume
to following through
that the
and
answer
making
is no,
sure
and I'll
that
proceed
people
to the
have-
next question, and I hope that we can work to make sure that those funds get to the people. Is it your department's view that the Puerto Rico government has done everything in its power to expedite the reconstruction process?
Oh, I believe that Puerto Rico has been working hard to reconstruct and to put itself back together and partnering with the federal government as well. Your
So is the
governor has
obstacle
been-
in the disbursements FEMA's fault?
The what?
Is the obstacle in these disbursements FEMA's responsibility?
I don't have the knowledge to know specifically where all the problems are with the response in Puerto Rico, although I do know that FEMA has not fulfilled the obligations it previously promised to the
Thank you.
island.
I'm going to shift to immigration in the interest of time. So you served as governor of South Dakota. Would you advise governors to give public assurances that federal immigration enforcement will not take place in their state?
Would I advise to governors that they not?
That they give public assurances that immigration enforcement will not occur in their states?
No, I prefer that governors partner with us to make their states safer. I believe that the relationships that we have on the ground in many states is absolutely critical to making sure.
So the
that
answer is no.
communities
You
and
would not
families are
advise them to
protected.
tell their constituents, no, there will not be any enforcement in this state. Would you have publicly told immigrants, as governor in your state, not to worry about deportations because your state wasn't a border state like Texas or California?
I felt as though my state was a border state because we were every day impacted by the drug trafficking and the human trafficking that was coming over the border and had put a foothold in the state of South Dakota. Every state was dramatically impacted.
Okay, so
by the open border policies
you
of
would
the
not have told immigrants in your state, don't worry about deportation. You would not have said that.
The laws need to apply equally to everybody. That's what is so discouraging about the previous administration is they picked winners
Okay,
and losers.
so
They
that's,
decided
that,
who
the
it
question
applied
has been
to
answered, that's
and
fine.
who it didn't.
You
That
would
doesn't
not,
happen
you would
anymore.
not say that. You
Now
would
the
not,
law-
you
now
would
the
tell your
laws-
constituents, immigration laws will be enforced in this state whether or not we are a border state like California or Texas.
Laws will be enforced, absolutely.
In January, the governor of Puerto Rico made an opposite claim. She told immigrants not to worry about deportations because we're not Texas or California. Days later, ICE conducted enforcement operations in immigrant neighborhoods in San Juan. Was that a responsible thing to say?
I didn't hear her say that and haven't heard this before, but I believe that the partnerships we have with governors is extremely powerful in keeping their communities safe.
That's a no answer. Was she aware, was she briefed by DHS about the immigrant raids that would happen in the ensuing days?
I have no knowledge to that situation. What I will tell you is that every governor that I know of feels the responsibility of protecting their state, and they should be making the best decisions to secure their communities and their families that live there.
And that includes telling people in their states or jurisdictions, the administration's policy is that there will be raids to detain people who were undocumented in their jurisdictions, not to tell them, don't worry, this will not happen here.
I am not certain as to the situation you're speaking to. I'll get more information so that I can respond to you appropriately.
But
I'm not certain.
hypothetically,
I'm not
as
certain what
governor,
announcements
would you have told the people of your state, the laws will be enforced here as in any other state?
What I would tell my people of South Dakota is that my job is to work for them and to represent them and to be their leader and protect their best interests. That includes making sure that citizens of South Dakota are my #1 priority every day.
I understand that, and I thank you for your time. And like I said at the beginning of my turn, I do look forward to working constructively on ways to reimagine FEMA and disaster response and to make sure that those funds, which today you have told us are not guaranteed for the people of Puerto Rico, are guaranteed and delivered on time. Thank you.
Gentleman's time is expired. I now recognize Mr. Luttrell for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, how are you today? I'd like to talk about the health and wellness of our operators, our DHS and immigration, everyone that's underneath your portfolio. I think the one thing that's often lost is that, you have military veterans in the room with you, and our role and responsibility was to put on a uniform in our body armor, and we deployed globally to fight terrorism. And we had to leave the country to do that. And the men and women under DHS, they put on their uniforms every day and deploy right out their front door. And that's challenging. That is a unforgivable, kind of space. And my focus in the veteran community and active duty service, as well as your department, is the health and wellness of our operators currently and after they leave the career. Can you shed some light on it? And to make another point, one of my lovely colleague from Texas was concerned about they cover their faces up and the kits that they wear, and I can understand that's aggressive. That's a posturing, and it's not. We don't get in gunfights every day, but the day that happens, you will appreciate the fact that you're wearing that uniform. And I'll also add, it's just, if you're presented with somebody that's got their face covered, that can be scary. I got it. But when you're dealing with terrorist organizations that are internal and on our borders, it's not the operator that they're going to go after. They'll take a picture of that face and go after the families. So it's anonymity for the operators too, which needs to be said because it's important to protect the men and women that work under your department. So if you will, please, can you kind of shed some light on me where we currently are now that you're the secretary for our health and wellness, cognitively and physically, and where we're going, please?
Well, it is a concern for me, especially since we've seen an escalation in violence against our law enforcement officers, and specifically those even within the Department of Homeland Security. The aggression that they face every single day as a part of their job duties is something that we have to make sure that we recognize and that we have the tools to help them and their family be successful. So going forward and making sure that we're providing health care, but also mental health care is a priority of the department and this administration, recognizing that the previous administration let a lot of dangerous individuals, terrorists, and gang members and known cartel members into this country. And now, and they've recruited new members, and they've recruited homegrown terrorists that are citizens of the United States that are members of TDA now and MS-13 that present new and unique challenges. That is something that we have made a priority to make sure that we're equipping them, to prepare them for situations they're going to face with training, and giving them the right equipment to protect themselves, but also when they step back from that line of duty, how we can help them be whole and go back and live a successful life with their family. What I would say is that it's difficult in areas of this country that were neglected for too long, especially in our Coast Guard. They're often very remote and isolated. They don't have access to specialty care, to mental health care, and it's my commitment to all of our departments and components and the Coast Guard that I get them that kind of care where they're located, because sometimes where they're stationed is not an area where that is available to them readily.
Yes, ma'am. And my office, and myself included, look forward to working with you and your team on this. I'd hate for that to be lost in translation as hard as Coast Guard, Coast Guard, Secret Service, our agents, as hard as they work, it's not, and I can't say I disagree, but it's just something that's happening. We don't do baseline assessments on these operators, which we should absolutely do. We should track the health and wellness from start to finish. And then when we hand them off back to their families, hey, we have the in comfort knowing that they're going to be fine once they move on to the next chapter of their life. So I look forward to further conversations with you and your team. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Kennedy from New York for 5 minutes questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Noem, thank you for your time before this committee. Today is a solemn day for my community in Buffalo, New York. 3 years ago, on May 14th, 2022, a gunman, motivated by racism and hatred, drove 2.5 hours from his home to the east side of Buffalo to carry out an act of domestic terrorism. Equipped with enhanced body armor, a tactical helmet, and a semi-automatic rifle, the gunman opened fire at a local grocery store in a predominantly black community. In just 123 seconds, he took 10 innocent souls that day, severely injured 3, and traumatized countless other individuals. Because of this act of domestic terrorism, radicalized and indoctrinated online, and carried out in the name of white supremacy, families in my community will never be whole again. Buffalo now joins a growing list of communities impacted by mass shootings carried out by lone wolf, homegrown, domestically radicalized, disturbed individuals. Secretary Noem, in your written testimony today, there's not one mention of this kind of threat to the homeland. You refer to foreign terrorist organizations. You refer to aliens who are affiliated with foreign terrorism. You refer to arrests of suspected gang members. Not once do you mention the term domestic terrorism, domestic terrorist, or lone wolf. There's a gaping hole in your testimony today. You fail to reassure this committee or the American people that you'll protect the homeland from bad actors, radicalized right here in the U.S., like the gunman who opened fire on my community 3 years ago today. There's been a systematic, intentional effort by your department and this administration since January 20th to ignore the very real threat posed by domestic terrorism. This is a blatant negligence made abundantly clear by the administration's budget and by President Trump's broader actions to defund the Department of Homeland Security initiatives that track and prevent domestic terrorism. The Trump administration's budget proposal for the Department of Homeland Security completely eliminates the Targeted Violence and Terrorism Prevention Grant Program, a critical DHS program dedicated to helping local communities, including law enforcement, to develop and strengthen efforts to counter attacks of targeted violence and terrorism, just like the racist Buffalo attack. This exact grant program awarded nearly $1 million in the aftermath of the 514 shooting in Western New York to help close research gaps about the radicalization of domestic terrorists, develop violence prevention modules, and improve bystander intervention. This program was also used to harden safety and prevention efforts in other communities that experienced targeted domestic terrorism, including a school shooting in Oakland County, Michigan, and a pattern of other domestic terrorist incidents. The budget proposal you're defending today justifies the elimination of this funding by arguing it was, quote, weaponized to target Americans exercising their First Amendment rights, end quote. If the suggestion that an act of domestic terrorism, which took the lives of 10 innocent people and forever changed my community, qualifies as protected First Amendment speech, then explain that to the families of the victims who were killed that day. Under this administration, we have a Department of Homeland Security that is making excuses for domestic terrorists under the guise of free speech and insulting communities like mine, especially on a day like today, as we mark the anniversary of unimaginable violence and loss. We can do better and we must do better. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Strong, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Noem, thank you for aiding President Trump in securing our border after years of negligence and mismanagement. No new laws were needed. New leadership was the only piece of the puzzle missing. I'd also like to thank the hardworking men and women of DHS for their tireless dedication to safeguarding our nation. Last week, I spoke to the FBI Director Patel about a recent visit he had to Huntsville, Alabama and Redstone Arsenal. We discussed the cost-effective location, distinct partnership opportunities, high quality of life for personnel, the remarkable talent pool, and available room to grow. As you may know, I'm proud to host HSI XCOM South and the National Academy for Advanced Training and Leadership in my district, along with many companies and organizations that support DHS. I'd like to invite you to come see for yourself the phenomenal work occurring in North Alabama. Secretary Noem, I'm curious, are there plans to move DHS personnel and programs out of the Beltway and closer to the citizens they serve?
Well, thank you for the question, Congressman. Currently, there aren't plans to move agencies or components outside of their offices, although we do believe that we need to be accountable to taxpayers and are evaluating every single mission set that each agency is tasked with and the individuals, how they are fulfilling it. So that is areas where you'll see reflected in our reconciliation ask and in our fiscal year 26 budget request. That reflects where those needs are, but also our ability to reprogram dollars that where the department got off mission and was perpetuating activities that were not a part of Homeland Security's reason for why it was created.
Thank you. I'd also be remiss if I didn't mention my role as chairman of the Emergency Management and Technology Subcommittee, and I want to thank you for meeting with us in New Orleans. You made your schedule available to meet that committee right after you were confirmed, and we really appreciate that. As you can imagine, I have an interest in the work of FEMA Review Council and was pleased to see the announcement of 13 new members. Secretary Noem, the President's executive order said the council would have up to 20 members. Will additional members be added, and how are you coordinating with the White House on the council?
Yes, absolutely. There is the potential for new members to be added, and that is a current evaluation that's ongoing with me and my team and the White House as well. So if you have recommendations, we certainly would continue to receive those.
Thank you. We're excited about those recommendations. What do you anticipate the priorities of the council will be, and how can we support that work?
Well, the priorities of the council is to evaluate FEMA as it stands today and how it can better be reformed and replaced to respond to people's needs in a time of crisis. What we can do to strengthen states, to give them more tools and resources to take care of their people and empower them to make decisions in in a critical response period. Many times you've seen over the years where the federal government has not shown up when they were expected to, and then even after a crisis was over, had committed to being there to help people restructure and to rebuild, and never followed through on it. We still have claims outstanding in FEMA from Hurricane Katrina, wildfire claims from out west that are 10 years old, where people said, we have this claim, this lost, FEMA committed to pay it and still has not followed through on that. We saw political targeting that happened in North Carolina, where individuals within FEMA decided who could get help and who didn't get help. So that needs to end, and this needs some integrity to it, and making sure the federal government's there for support, but the states are empowered to do the emergency response is very important to President Trump.
That support was determined based on the political sign they had in the front yards of their home.
That is correct.
And that's totally unacceptable. Switching gears, I'd also like to highlight the great work of CISA to protect our infrastructure and mass gathering events. Their training and exercises help states and localities respond quickly and effectively to evolving threats. In Huntsville, Alabama, collaboration among the FBI, ATF, CISA Office for Bombing Prevention represents a national hub of expertise focused on countering bomb threats and the use of explosives by adversaries. Secretary Noem, can you speak to how CISA is working with interagency partners to secure infrastructure, particularly ahead of the World Cup and Olympics?
Yeah, CISA is the federal cybersecurity agency. It is the priority point for all agencies to interact with and their connections to state and local governments. And many times CISA got siloed, and our CIA, FBI, intelligence agencies were siloed and not sharing information. So we're building out a cooperation that has never existed before, and where we're bringing them to the table, sharing information that we may have as far as vulnerabilities, but also in how we can partner with private industry. The fact of the matter is that's a resource that was neglected for much too long. And so bringing private industry to the table to tell us and help us go out there and find those bad actors. Oftentimes they know, but they don't have a protection of letting us know without some kind of liability that they expose themselves to. So we're committed to building those kinds of partnerships so that they can flag threats to us without worried about retribution from those bad actors into their own companies.
Secretary Noem, it's an honor to have you before us today. We'll see you in Alabama soon. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from New Jersey, Ms. Poe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, good afternoon. I wish we could have heard from you before ramming through a $70 billion reconciliation bill. But nevertheless, I'm really happy that and glad that we have a chance to speak with you today. Like many of my colleagues, I am deeply concerned that your department is blatantly ignoring our laws. The law is very, very clear. Members of Congress can show up unannounced to facilities, and ICE must accommodate a tour of their detention centers. The fact that your spokesperson suggested arresting members of Congress who were given a tour of the facility is disturbing and certainly dangerous. We will not accept threats or intimidation by anyone at your department or across the administration for exercising our constitutional oversight authority. Now, let me just refer now to my questions. The Trump administration's funding freeze has created chaos and unpredictability for state and local governments to respond to threats. Reportedly, $100 billion has been canceled or is being unlawfully withheld. You stated today that we are a nation of laws, yet you are actually violating the law. In our recent markup, I offered an amendment to prohibit DHS from delaying or withholding FEMA grant funding. Unfortunately, it was rejected by my GOP colleagues. As my district ramps up for the World Cup, our first responders and municipalities require resources today. By delaying and withholding grants like the Homeland Security Grant Program, you do not just create uncertainty, you undermine the ability of state and local governments to begin security planning for one of the world's largest sporting events. Right now, you are a month behind issuing guidance on this critical funding. Similarly, guidance has not been issued for the nonprofit Grant Security Program, which protects synagogues, churches, and mosques from threats. These delays harm our national security. Madam Secretary, when does your department plan for the Homeland Security Grant Program and the nonprofit Security Grant Program funding to be made available?
Congresswoman, every grant under the Department of Homeland Security is being evaluated to make sure that it's following statute as required by Congress as to how it should be allocated and obligated to local states and communities. So as many of those grants were paused and evaluated, you've seen that they've been continued and put out, but if they were misappropriated into things that were off of the guidance of how the grant should be utilized, then it was changed. But these grants that have been obligated and should go forward have been continued.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me just real quickly, because I know our time is it's nearing to a close. As you know, New Jersey is one of 11 American citizens that will, cities, that will host the FIFA World Cup matches next year. The final match will be held in my district in New Jersey. There will be tens of thousands of spectators at the final match and hundreds of thousands more attending Fan Fest throughout the northern New Jersey area. The World Cup is a time of international competition and celebration, but I worry about the chilling effect of the Trump administration's anti-immigrant rhetoric and America's ability to serve as a welcoming host. To add, the Trump administration is looking to reinstate and expand a travel ban targeting 43 countries for restrictions on entering the United States. Can you please tell us how you will ensure that fans traveling legally to the United States are not targeted for immigration raids?
We are already working as an administration with the teams from all the countries that will come and be competing and their fans as well to process their paperwork and to help facilitate their travel to the United States. And as you've seen, the president has formulated a task force that will focus on holding this unprecedented event and doing it in the safest manner possible while adding hospitality to it and helping people enjoy the matches and enjoy interacting with each other. And as you know, over 10 million people will attend the matches over that month-long period of time. Over 22 million people will interact through activities. You'd mentioned Fan Fest, and that is something that the Department of Homeland Security is tasked with. It's our responsibility to partner with local communities and cities that are the hosts, and we'll be working with your city as well to ensure that we're prepared for it, that we have the needs met, and that we are doing all that we can to secure each location.
Thank you. I look forward to working with you in that regard. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Brukeen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, it is so nice to see chaos and confusion and lawlessness being replaced by law and order. Thankful to you serving on this administration and implementing common sense. I don't know today that it was discussed, and if it has been, I missed it. The Colombian entity that was picked up in the last several days in Houston, convicted of murder that came across the border during the Biden administration, 21-year murder conviction sentence, and the very same ICE agents that were shoved and yelled and cursed at are the same ICE agents that are responsible for detaining and picking up this individual that was in the streets of Texas. You said earlier today in your testimony, discussing what happened in the last several days with colleagues even on this committee on the Democrat side, trying to go to a detention center. This is the same type of place, Delaney Hall, where you would find murderers and rapists, and like this Colombian entity, convicted of murder and is now in your custody. It's just madness that lawlessness is being perpetrated by even members of Congress. I want to switch gears. FEMA. There is great excitement, even as I'm talking to officials in Oklahoma who would love the opportunity to be able to make sure that the decisions for efficient use of taxpayer monies are implemented on the state level, knowing that the dollars will go farther, and knowing that you all, as you're discussing block granting, can you elaborate on current conditions, current status? There are people all over the country, even, there's a Democrat member that is former emergency management who talks about the efficiencies that can be picked up on the state level. Can you talk about where you all are at, where we're headed on FEMA reform that can make the taxpayer dollar go farther?
Yeah, we've got some incredible work ahead of us to do on FEMA and our response as a federal government and how we support states in this, and there's certainly a lot of people weighing in. We've got members of Congress on the House and the Senate side that have bills and legislation that they want to propose, but also I think it's important to have governors at the table because they're the ones who lead the response many times and know where the downfalls are. In many cases, there's hardworking FEMA employees that do their very best to deliver for those individuals in those communities. But what's happened in the past is that even under the previous administration, some of those FEMA employees were given the opportunity to not respond to a disaster if they didn't want to or if it wasn't convenient. And so recognizing the importance of this agency and prioritizing it and making sure it's there to support the local response is incredibly important to the success for those families that get impacted by unprecedented events. So we're taking input. This review council is going to be continuing to give insight to the White House as well, and then the president certainly has ideas. He's traveled and been there for people on their worst days, and he's heard their stories of how they thought FEMA would be there, FEMA promised they would be there, and then they never showed up. They had a claim that they couldn't do the paperwork themselves. They had to get people to help them fill out this complicated paperwork process, and then the claim was never paid, or there was some problem, and they had to appeal, and appealing was normal, and that just doesn't serve people. Yeah. We need to make sure that it's a predictable process that's timely, and the best way to do that is to empower the local supporters.
Well, I've told this story often. Given I've got a minute, I'll relay it to you. I'll never forget in 2012 in Oklahoma, a friend of mine were helping do some cleanup work on machinery. I was on a dozer, he was on a skid steer for people that didn't have insurance. Little rural area, required to push things into vegetative and non-vegetative brush piles. I'm on a dozer. And watched, I come from the dirt works world, and I watched us not be able to light on fire in a rural area that every rancher, from your background, does on an everyday basis when they're cleaning up their property. We had to, at state, local, and federal expense, reimbursed, bring in 18-wheelers with half rounds, take an excavator, track hoe to load that non-vegetative timber in the back of that, haul it off ground somewhere to bury it with another dozer or a track hoe. Between the trucking, the dozer, the excavator, 4 times the cost because, and I ran as a state senator, a new law trying to get state control of that, and we could not get agency heads in Oklahoma to agree because they were concerned we would lose FEMA reimbursement if we had state control over it. Loss of efficiency. Grateful to you all for your leadership, common sense, returning, not chaos, which was the former state before you got in this position. Thank you.
The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Crane, for 5 minutes.
I want to thank you, Ms. Noem, for coming here today and giving us your testimony. I also want to thank you for the amazing work that yourself and everybody at Homeland Security have done to not only secure our border within just a couple weeks, but also to start deporting folks that aren't supposed to be here in the first place. Secretary Noem, I'm very concerned about the behavior of one of my colleagues on this very committee who we saw assaulting both verbally and physically federal law enforcement officers just last week on national television. Ms. Noem, what kind of message do you think it sends to the country and radical political agitators that she sits here today, not being charged for a crime, to participate in today's hearing?
Well, Congressman, I believe that what you saw last Friday at Delaney Hall was not oversight. I believe that it was breaking into a federal facility and assaulting law enforcement officers. This Congresswoman was surrounded by people who were criminals that were taking criminal actions. And so we need to be honest about what happened there. And we also need to talk about the fact that we have always facilitated visits and tours of federal facilities. We would continue to do that as well. And we would encourage that they work with us to do that in the future rather than to do the unprecedented destructive actions that the Congresswoman and her colleagues engaged in last Friday.
Ms. Noem, do you think her presence here today emboldens others to behave in the very same way?
I think it would be sad if that's the testimony of what happened last Friday that gets perpetuated. I was shocked when I watched it and saw it, and was extremely discouraged to see that the colleagues that surround those three defend them. Because those actions, we wouldn't want our kids to act that way, our children, our grandchildren to act that way. That's not the America that we dreamed and envisioned for our country. America should be a land of opportunity and where laws are enforced, and there's consequences for breaking the law.
Thank you. Ms. Noem, are you familiar with Article 1, Section 9, Clause 2 of the Constitution that covers the suspension of the writ of habeas corpus?
Yes.
It says that the writ of habeas corpus shall not be suspended unless, when cases of rebellion or invasion, the public safety may require it. Are you aware of which presidents have suspended the writ of habeas corpus?
I know that President Lincoln did.
Yeah, also Roosevelt and President Grant. You testified under oath, I believe, that the Biden administration allowed an invasion into our country. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So do you think it falls under the constitutional guidelines that I just read to you?
I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but I believe it does.
You've also witnessed that the Democrats here today and also radical activist judges are trying to halt and deny the president's agenda to carry out his constitutional duties to keep Americans safe and carry out his promise to the American people to secure the border and carry out mass deportations of those who have entered the country illegally. Knowing this, are you open and supportive of this constitutional option to suspend the writ of habeas corpus to keep Americans safe and carry out the president's agenda?
Well, this is something that's not in my purview to weigh in on. This is the president's prerogative to pursue, and he has not indicated to me that he will or will not be taking that action.
I want to thank Rogan O'Hanley for his efforts to bring this constitutional solution into the national conversation. Now I want to shift gears real quick. Ms. Noem, on May 5th, 2025, I joined Congressman Zinke and 8 of my fellow Republican colleagues in asking why it was appropriate for DOD and DHS to require real IDs for entry into Arlington National Cemetery.
I did see that letter this week, sir.
My question, what information can you share on the security posture of Arlington Cemetery that require real ID?
Well, sir, I'm not certain as to the procedures and the requirements at Arlington Cemetery. I do know that real ID at our airports for travel was required by statute and law change over 20 years ago. So that has been implemented on May 7th, and we have over 90% compliance that has happened at our airports since then. And overwhelmingly, the vast majority of travelers have had a real ID and have utilized that or a federally recognized ID going forward. But as far as what is required at Arlington Cemetery, I have not been in the knowledge of what those requirements are.
In that case, would you consider taking a look at that and also consider recommending repealing that requirement?
I can certainly take a look at that and follow up with a conversation with you, absolutely.
Thank you. I yield back.
The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Ogles, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Madam Secretary, for being here. Mr. Chairman, we've spent the last few hours with some of our colleagues defending rapists, murderers, individuals who committed a variety of crimes, and yet I don't believe a single one has asked about the 300,000 children that have been lost in our nation. I don't think a single one of them asked about Lake and Riley's family, or the young girls that recently have been reported between the ages of 12 and 14 that have been raped in Louisiana, Iowa, New York, and other states. And so as we sit here and have this conversation, let's level set about who we're really talking about. We're talking about criminals and thugs. And so let's get back to the reality of who these people are, and not to mention the fact that if they come here illegally, their first action when they come into this country is in fact a criminal act. Now, Madam Secretary, we've heard a lot of misinformation and rapid fire. Let's see if we can't set the record straight on a few things. When it comes to detention centers and oversight provided to Congress, does that oversight provision allow members of Congress to break into detention centers?
No, sir, I don't believe.
Does that oversight authority give members of Congress the right to assault members of law enforcement?
No, sir.
Madam Secretary, is assaulting a member of law enforcement a crime?
Yes.
I would urge, Mr. Chairman, that this committee look into anyone in Congress who has assaulted a member of law enforcement and the respective actions be taken as necessary, looking at the totality of the circumstances. Regards to FEMA, it is my understanding, you can correct me if I'm wrong, upon taking the helm, you discovered that there were a variety of unpaid claims, some of those going back 10 to 20 years.
Absolutely.
It is also my understanding that under the vision of President Donald Trump and your leadership, you plan to change the response time from 10 to 20 years to 6 months.
That is true.
Madam Secretary, as someone who was formerly a county executive, whose one of my departments was in fact emergency management, I can tell you that it will be a necessary and very useful as states and communities look to be reimbursed. Let's turn to Nashville, which is part of my district. Under your leadership, Homeland Security and ICE has conducted a variety of raids. Recently, 95, I do believe, of which were arrested who had previous criminal charges, 31 of which were previously deported and snuck back into this country. One of those was a sexual predator. So again, let's level set as to who we are talking about. We're talking about criminals and thugs who have no business being in our country. That being said, instead of thanking you and your leadership and thanking the president, the mayor of Nashville criticized and attacked law enforcement verbally. He then instructed members of law enforcement to report any communication with federal authorities. He then directed the Police Community Oversight Board to direct citizens to file complaints against law enforcement if they cooperate with federal law enforcement. Considering we've seen a 400% increase against federal law enforcement, do these types of statements and actions by a municipal leader concern you?
Yes, absolutely. They perpetuate the violence against law enforcement officers. And what happens many times then is that our agents within the Department of Homeland Security go into situations with no backup, with no local response of people who know the communities, know the routes, the roads, or the needs to emergency services that may be there. So it absolutely makes them much more vulnerable to a situation to which their lives could be in jeopardy.
Yes, ma'am, and if a municipal leader is found to be aiding and abetting illegal immigrants to evade federal law enforcement, would that be a criminal act?
Yes, I believe it would, sir.
And if elected officials impede ICE or Homeland Security in doing their job and pursuing illegal immigrants, would that be a criminal act?
I believe so.
Madam Secretary and Mr. Chairman, I will be asking the Committee of Homeland Security and Judiciary to be looking into the mayor of Nashville and any collusion or impeding of federal authorities and conducting their work in the city of Nashville. I would also encourage this committee and judiciary to look at other leaders, municipal leaders across the country, as they obstruct this administration, this Madam Secretary and her employees in doing their constitutional job, which is uphold the rule of law. Madam Secretary, I thank you and I yield back.
Is the gentleman trying to offer a motion or what?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to Secretary Noem for being here. So I represent the 3rd District of South Carolina, and we're happy about the work that you and your team have done and continue to do to secure our border. It's very important. I mean, we could sit here all day and talk about the fentanyl crisis and the trafficking, and it does affect each and every one of us. So you've made it clear that securing the border is not just a national security issue, but it's a financial one. Can you speak to how these enforcement gains translate into tangible cost savings for American taxpayers in counties in Middle America where local law enforcement have had to bear the strain of dealing with these cartel-fueled crime, and just as the fentanyl and the trafficking that I mentioned as well.
Yes, the partnerships we've been able to build as a federal agency with local law enforcement and with state law enforcement has been key to helping make communities much safer in the last several months. Those state officials are so grateful to have someone come alongside them and help them address the public safety concerns and threats that they have and that they've been living with for the last several years. And so we have created, through the 287G program, there's also other programs out there to where we operate in a task force model to go out and do enforcement operations, but also to bring consequences for those that are criminally breaking our laws. Many times you have in areas where these people have committed multiple crimes and been re-released. In fact, in some sanctuary cities, that's still happening, where people have committed acts of murder or rape that are still out on the loose, but because local law enforcement isn't addressing the issue, we haven't been able to capture those individuals yet. So we're always grateful for law enforcement that cares about their community and will step up and help protect them from these violent criminals.
Well, great, thank you. And I know you've worked hard with Governor McMaster, and he appreciates your efforts as well. My next question, as part of your broader effort to return DHS to its core mission, are there specific TSA programs or administrative functions under review for potential reforms or streamlining or maybe even consolidation? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, we're working to help TSA get the technology it needs to do better screening at airports and to make it much more streamlined for the passengers. I think everybody that I meet has some story of frustration that they've had at an airport or while traveling or in security lines. I would say just a few. But I would say that the technology needs that TSA has have been neglected for far too long. So having exit lanes covered by gates instead of individuals would streamline it and help us secure the systems faster, making sure that we have the processes in place to streamline luggage and passengers without the need to take things out of bags and to take off shoes are things that are possible, but we need to invest in them. And that would not only help our transportation security officers be able to focus on their responsibilities, but it also would make it a much better experience for families that are trying to use our federal air system.
Well, thank you. I also serve on the Science, Space, and Technology Committee, and I look forward to hearing about what's around the corner as well with that committee.
Yes,
and thank you for being here. Thanks again today, and I yield back.
The gentlelady yields. I now recognize Mr. McKenzie from Pennsylvania for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Madam Secretary, for joining us here today. I would first like to start by thanking you for the incredible job that you've done securing our southern border in just the first 100 days of the Trump administration. Seeing a 90% decrease in encounters and apprehensions is an incredible job and is a testimony to your leadership and the leadership that we're seeing in this administration. There are two things that I would like to talk about today. First, sanctuary cities, and second, protecting American workers. What we see and hear in this committee today is the defense of violent, illegal immigrant criminals in our local communities. They are more focused on defending these violent criminals from deportation than they are on protecting American citizens in our local communities. And this plays out all across the country. In my local community in Northampton County, they have signed an Executive Order 2028, which bans ICE from arresting illegal immigrants when they're going through processing for a separate crime. And what this means in practice is that when ICE wants to go arrest a violent member of Tren de Aragua or a domestic abuser who is going through the processing in our local community, they cannot go inside that courthouse and actually arrest that person. They have to stake out the courthouse outside, taking up hours of resources from law enforcement, potentially leaving our community more vulnerable. If that person were to go out a different exit of the courthouse and escape into our local community, they would be free to rain terror all across our beautiful Lehigh Valley. So when we see people talking about due process, and when we hear about upholding the rule of law, there are people all across this country who want to defend sanctuary city status in violation of federal law. In violation of federal law, yet they want to stand here as